Canadians have become united in the face of the fundamental change in U.S. trade policy. That's their choice. Yesterday, Canada and the UAE signed, finally, a Foreign Investment Promotion and Partnership Agreement, or FIPA. This will unlock tens of billions of dollars in investment between our two countries. And for Canadians, it's an opportunity to expand for our engineering firms, our construction companies, our aerospace sector, our agri-food, seafood producers, our AI firms.
Canada has just delivered one of the clearest signs yet that the country is stepping into a new global role. In Abu Dhabi, Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled a sweeping $115 billion investment plan that reads less like a routine economic announcement and more like a declaration of national confidence. For years, Canada played cautiously on the global stage, especially when dealing with the United States. But this time, Carney made something unmistakably clear. Canada is done waiting for Washington's permission. The country is building its future on its own terms with partners who actually want to build. At the Canada-UAE Investment Summit, Carney addressed a room full of investors, ministers, CEOs, and Emirati leaders. It was the kind of audience that signals seriousness, people who move capital, shape energy markets, and influence the technological future. Carney walked them through what Canada has already launched. In the span of just a few months, his government has announced more than $10 billion worth of nation-building projects. These include a new deepwater port project in Montreal, expanded energy corridors linking provinces, critical mineral highways running from mines to global markets, and major clean electricity expansions meant to double Canada's already 80% clean grid. But the investment tally was only the surface. What mattered even more was the partnership that Carney came to cement. Canada and the UAE signed a long-awaited Foreign Investment Protection Agreement, unlocking tens of billions in future deals. Carney and the UAE leadership also agreed to begin negotiating a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, a modern trade deal designed to strip away tariffs, open new markets, and anchor long-term supply chains between the two economies. Carney underscored how deeply aligned the two countries already are. Both are energy superpowers. Both sit at the intersection of global trade routes. Both want to lead the AI, digital infrastructure, and clean technology revolutions that will define this century. And both are willing to invest real capital to make it happen. Carney spoke with striking bluntness when he said that Canadians have become united in the face of fundamental changes in U.S. trade policy. It wasn't rhetoric, it was the practical reality facing the country. Under President Donald Trump's second term, the U.S. has returned to a hardline protectionist approach, sweeping tariffs, aggressive reshoring demands, and policy shifts that disrupt established supply chains. Reuters reporting through 2025 confirms that Canadian exporters have been diversifying because of instability, and the Bank of Canada has even lowered growth forecasts due to U.S. trade uncertainty. Carney's speech captured a turning point that has been building quietly for years. Canada no longer treats Washington's decisions as the gravitational center of its economy. Instead, it is preparing for a future where the U.S. is just one partner among many. This shift isn't anti-American, it's pro-Canadian, and that distinction matters. Canada's strategy stretches far beyond this summit. Carney outlined an economic map that now runs through Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, a multi-engine model designed to eliminate dependence on any single market. Canada has already finalized an economic partnership with Indonesia and is deep in negotiations with Thailand and the Philippines, with a full ASEAN deal expected next year. Even long-frozen relationships with India and China are reopening, highlighted by Carney's turning point meeting with Xi Jinping at APEC. All of this reinforces a simple point. Canada is positioning itself at the center of several global networks, not just North America. That shift matters as the 2026 USMCA review approaches, giving Ottawa leverage it hasn't had in decades. A standout moment in Carney's speech was his praise for the UAE's clean energy achievements. Masdar's 70-gigawatt clean power portfolio, including the world's largest solar plus battery project, is redefining what renewable baseload looks like. Carney linked this directly to Canada's ambitions, a grid already among the world's cleanest and a plan to double capacity within a decade. This puts Canada and the UAE on the same forward trajectory, while the United States, under Trump, moves in the opposite direction by rolling back clean energy incentives and freezing offshore wind development. As U.S. momentum slows, Canada and the UAE are building the industrial ecosystem of the future. Carney highlighted another crucial point: a billion-dollar agreement now close to finalization that will expand critical minerals processing capacity inside Canada. This is on top of the federal government's new $2 billion Minerals Sovereign Fund and more than $10 billion earmarked for mines-to-port infrastructure. For the world's clean tech economy, this is not a side story, it's a core story. Reuters and AP coverage consistently note that the United States remains heavily dependent on Chinese minerals because it lacks processing facilities at home. Trump's tariffs on Canadian metals have only added to U.S. supply instability. Canada is seizing that vacuum, partnering with nations like the UAE that need secure access to these minerals. In global terms, this positions Canada as the backbone of the Western critical minerals supply chain, something the United States cannot replicate quickly under current policies. Carney ended his speech by describing Canada as a AAA-rated, fiscally disciplined, stable democracy with some of the strongest institutions in the world. But it wasn't bragging, it was positioning. Canada is making itself the safe, predictable anchor in a volatile global economy. The fact that Canadian pension funds holding more than $2 trillion in assets are heading to the UAE early next year is a signal of intent. This is a two-way relationship built on scale, credibility, and ambition. It is not symbolic diplomacy. It is structural realignment. Canada is no longer knocking on doors asking to participate. It is setting the table and inviting the world to come to it.
Carney's $115 billion plan is more than a domestic investment package. It is the blueprint of a new global posture. Canada is stepping into a world where partnerships define power, where clean energy leadership determines competitiveness, and where countries thrive not by clinging to old alliances, but by building new ones. For decades, Canada's economic story was almost exclusively tied to the United States. Today, that story is being rewritten. The UAE is one pillar, ASEAN is another, East Asia is a rising engine, and the US, while still critical, is no longer the only destination. The question now is how quickly Canada can turn this moment into momentum, and whether the United States is ready to accept that Canada no longer lives in its shadow.
The administration has used that declaration as a pretext to impose sweeping tariffs on a friend, on a neighbor, on an ally, which are taxes paid by American consumers and businesses on Canadian imports.
In Washington, something unusual is happening. A U.S. senator is standing up not against a foreign rival, but against her own president, and for Canada. That's the story unfolding this week as Senator Amy Klobuchar, joined by both Democrats and Republicans, takes the floor of the U.S. Senate to demand an end to President Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods. At a time when the White House keeps declaring economic victory, the reality looks far different. The tariffs that were supposed to protect America's economy are now dividing its own leaders. Even inside Congress, voices are rising to say what many Americans already feel, that this trade war has gone too far and that its victims are not in Ottawa, but at home. When even Washington senators start echoing the same frustration Canadians have been expressing for months, you know something fundamental has shifted. The resolution introduced by Senator Klobuchar wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a bipartisan act, backed by Senators Tim Kaine, Rand Paul, Mark Warner, and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, aimed at formally ending the national emergency Trump invoked to justify tariffs on Canada. Their message is simple: the so-called emergency doesn't exist. There's no security threat at the northern border, no crisis in cross-border trade, only a policy built on political impulse. In April 2025, the Senate had already voted once to terminate the same emergency declaration, but the administration refused to lift it. Instead, it doubled down, raising tariffs to 35% on August 1st, and then added another 10% in late October, this time, astonishingly, in response to a provincial ad campaign from Ontario that used Ronald Reagan's old speech criticizing protectionism. For many in Congress, this was the breaking point. What began as an argument over trade had turned into a test of constitutional power. Lawmakers from both parties began to agree that tariffs imposed by presidential mood swings were destabilizing not just the economy, but America's credibility. It's rare to see Rand Paul and Chuck Schumer agree on anything, yet this time they did, because no matter where they stand politically, they could see that punishing Canada, a historic ally, was punishing America itself. Behind the politics lies a straightforward economic truth. Every tariff is a tax, one that American consumers and businesses pay first. Since the new tariffs began in March 2025, the costs have rippled across U.S. households and industries. According to data cited in the Senate hearing, the average American family is paying nearly $2,000 more per year for everyday goods. Small businesses and tourism towns near the border are feeling it most, with fewer visitors and rising costs for supplies. Aluminum cans, lumber, and farm equipment, all dependent on cross-border supply chains, have become more expensive not because of shortages, but because of policy. Economically, it's a loop that feeds itself. When the U.S. taxes imports from Canada, it drives up domestic prices, reduces consumer spending, and hurts exports in return. The problem isn't abstract. It's visible in empty stores along border towns and the 20% drop in Canadian visitors this year reported by state tourism boards. So while the administration calls these tariffs America First, the reality looks more like America turning on itself. North of the border, the response has been measured. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who met recently with several U.S. senators in Ottawa, has avoided escalation. Instead, he keeps stressing dialogue and long-term stability. During those meetings, Carney reportedly told lawmakers that the U.S.-Canada relationship has become mostly transactional. For many Canadians, that single phrase captured the current era perfectly. It signaled that Canada is no longer willing to define its economic identity through Washington's choices. In fact, each new tariff from the White House has only strengthened the case for diversification. Canadian trade missions are multiplying across Asia, and public sentiment at home has shifted sharply towards supporting Buy Canadian initiatives. While American politics seem locked in a cycle of tariff announcements and Senate rebellions, Ottawa's tone is calm, consistent, and confident. It's not the noise of confrontation that defines leadership, but the discipline to outlast it. Back in Washington, the debate is no longer about whether tariffs are good or bad. It's about limits, on power, on law, and on the president's ability to use emergency authority to change trade policy at will. The Senate resolution that Klobuchar and her colleagues pushed forward marks one of the few times in recent memory that Congress has united across party lines to check executive power. The courts, too, are weighing in. A federal trade court panel, composed of judges appointed by 3 different presidents, unanimously ruled that the administration's broad use of emergency powers to impose these tariffs was unlawful under the 1977 National Emergencies Act. Their decision underscored a simple principle: Congress controls the power to tax, not the White House. Economically, the message is just as significant. It reflects a growing recognition that the stability of North American trade, built over decades through the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, cannot survive under constant policy whiplash. When tariffs change 100 times in a single year, as trade groups testified, no company can plan investments or hiring. The revolt in Washington, then, isn't just political. It's a reminder that predictability is part of prosperity. Ironically, while America wrestles with its own divisions, Canada is experiencing a quiet surge in national confidence. The tariffs that were supposed to pressure Canada's economy have instead unified public opinion and accelerated industrial policy. Across provinces, industries are investing more at home and turning outward to new Asian markets. Even U.S. border towns are feeling it, with fewer Canadian visitors and struggling small shops. Tourism losses are now visible across several states. To many observers, it's a striking reversal. The tariffs intended to demonstrate strength have exposed weakness, a U.S. policy so erratic that its own senators, courts, and business groups are working to restrain it. Meanwhile, Canada's measured patience is earning global respect. In the end, this debate is no longer about tariffs or trade statistics. It's about how a nation governs itself under pressure. When senators from both parties rise in the same chamber to tell a president that he's gone too far, it marks a turning point. The same words that once united Americans against foreign competition are now being used to defend cooperation with one of their oldest allies. The lesson is simple. Economic nationalism sounds powerful in a speech, but fragile in practice. Tariffs can start as tools of leverage and end as symbols of isolation. For Canada, the turmoil south of the border is no longer a threat, it's validation. Every time Washington chooses confrontation over cooperation, Canada's case for independence grows stronger. Its leaders are choosing strategy over spectacle, stability over chaos, and long-term partnership over short-term politics. As history has shown, real strength isn't measured by how loudly a country shouts, but by how steadily it stands. And right now, Canada is standing tall, while America argues with itself.
If you poke a bear, they might strike back. And maybe that's the key takeaway. You know, the fact of the matter is for many Canadians, there's not much that they can do on an individual basis except boycotting, avoiding buying U.S. goods, or avoiding or delaying travel to the United States. And it looks like a significant proportion of Canadians not only are doing that, but believe that it is helpful or somewhat helpful.
Across Canada, a quiet but powerful wave of resistance is still rolling. Months after President Trump's sweeping import duties triggered a North American trade war, the boycott of U.S. goods and tourism has not disappeared. It is still growing. In supermarkets from Halifax to Vancouver, shoppers are reading the fine print on every label. Families planning winter trips to Florida are changing their destinations. Local stores now proudly display signs saying, "Made in Canada," and the message behind them is unmistakable. Canadians are choosing their side.
According to a new Nanos research poll, 4 out of 5 Canadians say that boycotting American-made stuff or avoiding tourism to the United States altogether will strengthen our country's bargaining position in the ongoing trade war launched by President Trump.
According to a new Nanos research poll released in October 2025, 4 out of 5 Canadians, roughly 80% of the population, believe that refusing to buy American products or avoiding travel to the United States strengthens Canada's bargaining position in the trade dispute launched by Washington earlier this year. Only 18% said the boycott is not helpful. What began as a policy fight between governments has become a movement of everyday citizens using their spending power as a form of quiet defiance. In a country known for moderation and diplomacy, this is a striking show of national unity. When the Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, furniture, and auto parts in early 2025, the intention was to force Ottawa into concessions. But the impact went beyond government offices and boardrooms. It reached directly into households. The numbers tell the story. In February, new import duties ranging from 10 to 35% were imposed under U.S. national security rules. By mid-year, the U.S. Department of Commerce reported that the average input cost in the auto sector had already risen by more than 12%. For Canada, a country whose manufacturing corridor depends on cross-border supply chains, this was devastating. Factories struggled and border paperwork multiplied. Yet instead of backing down, Canadians began to adapt. A consumer shift took hold. Older Canadians led the charge. 85% of those aged 55 and above told Nanos Research they support the boycott. Among those aged 35 to 54, 74% agreed. Support was strongest in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, where local industries have been hardest hit by the tariffs. What makes this moment different is the scope of participation. It is not limited to activists or politicians. Ordinary citizens, retirees, and small business owners are joining the movement. Even travel data shows a tangible decline in Canadian tourism to the United States, especially in border states like Vermont, Michigan, and New York. Tourism agencies in those areas have begun warning of lower bookings and declining retail sales. A strategy meant to isolate Canada is now hurting communities across the U.S. that depend on Canadian visitors.
The boycott has turned into something larger than a consumer reaction. It has become a political signal. Trump's tariffs were supposed to pressure Ottawa by weakening its economy. Instead, they have strengthened the idea of economic independence. In practical terms, three consequences are now visible. First, consumer backlash. Canadians have internalized the dispute. Each purchase or canceled trip has become an act of self-assertion. Second, economic spillover. U.S. businesses near the border are feeling the loss of Canadian customers, especially in tourism and retail. Reports from regional chambers of commerce show significant declines in cross-border spending since the summer. Third, political momentum. The boycott gives Prime Minister Mark Carney's government greater leverage in ongoing negotiations with Washington ahead of the 2026 USMCA review. Public opinion is now firmly behind him. Data from the Nanos poll also reveals a supermajority effect. 54% of Canadians called the boycott very helpful, and another 26% say it is somewhat helpful. Combined, that's an overwhelming national consensus rarely seen in modern politics. The Trump administration may not have anticipated this. By using tariffs to project strength, it has sparked a collective determination among Canadians to protect their own markets. The White House expected economic pressure. Instead, it has encountered a surge of unity that crosses age, region, and political lines.
The ripple effects are already visible. For decades, Canada's economy was deeply intertwined with the United States, from auto parts in Ontario to grain exports in the prairies and energy shipments from Alberta. Now that dependence is being reevaluated. In response to trade uncertainty, Ottawa is encouraging a Buy Canadian strategy across public procurement while exploring new export partnerships with the European Union and several Asian economies. The government is also using this moment to mobilize U.S. border states, reminding them that Canadian consumers are vital to their own economic stability. Within Canada, the boycott has taken on symbolic power. It represents more than protest. It signals a shift in national confidence, that Canadians, as individuals, can influence the direction of trade policy through their collective choices. In a global economy dominated by superpowers, that sense of agency is rare. Meanwhile, for Washington, the consequences are growing harder to ignore. Cross-border travel is down, tourism revenue in key U.S. regions has slipped, and public sentiment in Canada has hardened. Each of these developments chips away at the soft power the U.S. once enjoyed across its northern border. In trying to teach Canada a lesson, Trump has instead taught Canadians something else, that resilience and economic loyalty can be a form of sovereignty. The boycott may have started as a small act of frustration, but today it stands as a symbol of how ordinary people can shape the balance of power in a trade war.
I would ask you to, when you think about Canada, actually that's my request, think about Canada. As a strong, sovereign, independent nation, think about Canada as that.
To the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered remarks that sounded like a direct challenge to Donald Trump's economic vision. The setting was formal, yet the message was striking. While Washington has leaned on tariffs and hardline tactics, Carney presented Canada as confident, resourceful, and ready to lead. For an audience of diplomats, investors, and policy thinkers, it was a moment that flipped expectations. Instead of looking cornered by America's pressure, Canada looked energized and outward-facing. Carney's words landed as a reminder that Trump's tariff gamble has created space for others to project strength.
We have what the world wants. Take on the energy side, we are an energy superpower. We are top 5 in 10 of the world's most important critical minerals. We are a leading developer of AI.
Carney's central argument was simple. Canada has what the world needs. He listed energy, minerals, technology, and capital as the pillars of a strategy that could thrive even in a fractured global system. Canada already produces 85% of its energy from clean sources and is one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. The country is also in the top 5 for reserves of 10 critical minerals, and 40% of listed mining companies worldwide are based in Canada. On technology, Carney pointed to the volume of AI and quantum talent produced by Canadian universities. And beyond resources and research, Canadian pension funds remain among the most active infrastructure investors globally. At a time when the United States is demanding billions in foreign investment under strict tariff frameworks, Canada is pitching itself as stable, reliable, and fiscally capable. This contrast is powerful. Trump's tariffs were meant to pull investment into the U.S., yet they are making Canada's pitch look more attractive. Carney went further, laying out how Ottawa is turning words into deals. In late June, Canada signed a sweeping economic and security agreement with the European Union, the most comprehensive pact ever between the EU and a non-member. Just last week, Ottawa advanced a new cooperative framework with Mexico inside the USMCA, ensuring deeper trade links at the very moment Washington was using tariffs to apply pressure. Carney also pointed to Canada's role in building G7 buyers clubs for critical minerals, designed to reduce reliance on China and guarantee predictable supplies for allies. These moves are especially significant because they lock Canada into long-term arrangements on both sides of the Atlantic and across North America. In practice, it means European auto plants, Mexican factories, and U.S. defense contractors may all find themselves relying on Canadian resources and trade corridors. That kind of structural leverage is what makes Trump's tariffs look less like a weapon and more like an opening for Canada. These are not symbolic gestures. Each step ties Canada into new alliances while chipping away at the leverage Washington hoped to wield. Instead of isolation, Ottawa has opened doors in Europe, Mexico, and Asia, positioning itself at the center of supply chains that the U.S. cannot easily replicate.
We have the resources the world needs. We have the talent to turn that potential into growth. We're a reliable partner. We're connected more than anyone else through trading relationships with any other part of the world.
The contrast is hard to ignore. Trump has promoted tariffs as a tool to restore American control, yet those same tariffs are leaving space for Canada to climb. Carney's remarks in New York showed a leader framing his country as both resource powerhouse and dependable partner. Ottawa has reduced interprovincial trade barriers, passed fast-track legislation for hundreds of billions of dollars in new projects, and committed to doubling defense spending by 2030. These moves reinforce the idea that Canada is not waiting for permission. Instead, it is using Washington's hardline stance as fuel to accelerate its own agenda. For U.S. policymakers, the message is uncomfortable. Allies that were expected to bend under tariffs are finding ways to thrive without them. Carney closed by urging the audience to think of Canada not only as a country of values, but as a nation with tangible strengths that the world depends on. In the end, the council speech underscored a reversal of roles. While Trump builds barriers, Carney builds bridges. And in this shifting landscape, that difference may decide which vision of North America carries more weight in the decade ahead.